Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer, and I hope everyone is doing okay. Today I have lots to share with you. First, I'm going to share some ideas for using die-cut scraps on your cards. Now, I'm focusing on using border dies and background dies, but you can also use these ideas if you create your own cardstock scrap strips for your card. So, I've got lots of ideas for that. I also will be doing a different size card this time. These are what folks call slimline cards, where they're long and narrow. And I'll tell you, it's really fun and refreshing to use this different size. It's nice to change things up. Well, Pinkfresh Studio is coming out with a line of products that are perfect for slimline cards. Now, this is one of the example die sets that they have. This has 2 stitched rectangle dies and 2 regular dies. And I've got the biggest size dimension up there on the top left. And I will put in my description the dimensions that are most common for slimline cards, including what Pinkfresh Studio designed these to go with. But I'll just say that my cards today are just a little bit smaller than 4 inches tall and a little bit smaller than 9 inches wide. These will fit into a business envelope, so any of your letter envelopes that you mail your bills in, you can use for this. Now, Pinkfresh Studio did just release what they call Slimline Essentials, and these are all dies that are perfect for this size card. And these are just a few of the different products in the collection and the ones that I'll be using in today's video. So I actually use one more, and you'll see that later on. Just wanted to show you what size we're going for here today, a little bit smaller than 4 by 9. Okay, let's start with this example here where I use one of the other Slimline Essentials dies. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Slimline Diagonal Stripes die. Now, I like this because it cuts a background with those diagonal openings, and you can use the leftover strips that it cuts for another card. So I actually use this die on lots of colors of blue, purple, and mint colored cardstock. Now, these pieces of cardstock are 4 1/4 by 8.5 inches long because I normally create a note card by cutting my cardstock the long way so I can create 2 top folding note cards. So I usually end up using one of the halves and then saving the others for something else. So I have this stack of 4 1/4 by 8.5 inch pieces that are perfect for this. So these are pieces that have been waiting to be used. Now, when die cutting these, the die is as wide as the cutting plate, so you could die cut it with 1 pass through. But I found that by die cutting it with 2 passes, I can be sure I completely die cut it. So I do half of the die going one way, and then I shift it over and do the other half going the other way, which you just saw me do, and I can be sure I get a nice cut. I'm going to try to keep the pieces in there so they don't fall out, and I can kind of keep it nice and tidy. And I will repeat this die cutting with my other pieces of cardstock. So I can go ahead and create a bunch of backgrounds at once, and then we'll mix all the pieces together. So there you saw me cut half of it. I'll shift it over, put the plate back on top, and run that back through again. So all of it gets cut beautifully. Okay, so now that I have all my backgrounds cut, I went ahead and did them all. I've cut a piece of white cardstock using one of the slimline dies that I showed you earlier, but you could just cut a piece of white cardstock to be the same dimension as this diagonal piece. I covered the white cardstock with adhesive, and now I'm putting a white die cut piece on top. I cut it from that same die I just showed you, but white cardstock this time. And now there's adhesive exposed in all of those diagonal openings. So I'm taking the diagonal strips, the little pieces, from all of those different colors of cardstock that I die cut. And I'll be able to quickly create this beautiful striped background. And I still have all my other colored backgrounds and all the other strips to make additional cards. But let's start with this one. We have this long card design, so we can really fit more on here. You can make it vertical or horizontal. I decided to make this one vertical. I'll be using the Pinkfresh Studio Simple Blossom stamp set, which I've used before and is definitely one of my favorites from this year. It's such a playful, kind of modern look to it. Simple stamp layering, as you can see from the example on the packaging. So I'm not going to show all of the stamping. I just want to mention what I did. I stamped all of the flowers in my lightest color, and then I stamped the second layer in a slightly darker color. I use the same color inks throughout this video, and I'll put the colors in the top left so you can see what they are. I used all Pinkfresh Studio dye inks for this. After I did both layers of the flowers in different colors, I also did the stems and leaves included in the stamp set. I then used the coordinating die to cut them all out. So now I have some pieces that I can arrange on my card. Again, I'm just going to skip through this because I wanted to save the time and focus on the techniques. I also used the Pinkfresh Studio's Sentiment Suite Hello die, which I've used before. This has the thin lined hello and the shadow. So I put the card together. Really, it's just assembling the different pieces. I did die cut extra pieces from some of the dies to glue behind the stamped pieces so there would be dimension to them. You could also use foam squares if you prefer. I also added gemstones onto the flower just for a little bit of sparkle. So you can see how I was able to quickly create that background after I did die cutting of a bunch of different colors of scraps that I had. And now I have more pieces for additional cards. So here's another card where I'm going to use some of those leftover scraps. I'm going to fly through this one too because it's pretty basic once you do the scrap technique, which I'll start with. So I have that die from before with the scallop circles. This is from the Pinkfresh Studio Slimline design. And I traced the 3 circles onto a piece of white cardstock. I covered the circle areas with adhesive, and now I'm laying some of those leftover scraps up against each other to form a stripe background area. So notice these are all the pieces left over from the backgrounds I cut earlier. Now once I've covered over one of those circle areas, you can see how I have the perfect backdrop for behind that circle. So I'm going to cut that piece, and then I actually ended up trimming it down so I could rotate it because I wanted horizontal lines. And I'll glue that behind our window. And I will repeat this for the other 2 windows. So think about any scraps that you may have left over that you can put behind a window to allow it to show through. So after I finished the 3 window areas, I added some of the leftover flowers from our last card. I also added a sentiment, but decided I wanted those scallop windows to stand out a bit more. So I die cut 3 more of the scallop window background dies. And then I used a circle die to cut around the windows, so I ended up with these frames, and I'll show you that process on the future card in this video. But I glued 3 together, and then I'm gluing those around each of the windows on my card. So I'll lift up the sentiments and the flowers and just kind of tuck it under there. So now I have those little frames to make those windows stand out even more. So you can see I've got the leftover flowers from before that we stamped from that Simple Blossom stamp set, and put a gemstone at the center of the flowers for just a little bit of sparkle. I also added a long sentiment on this. These long cards are great for those long sentiments, and I thought it was perfect stretched across those windows. I then added the background onto a pool colored note card that I created that is a little bit smaller than 4 inches by 9 inches. So think about different dies that you may have that have openings, maybe a fancy circle die like this or a diamond die, whatever you have. Think about using some cardstock scraps as strips to fill in behind that window and allow it to show through. By the way, that sentiment is from this Pinkfresh Studio Scripted Bold Sentiment 1 stamp set. It's that long one there right across the top. Okay, now remember how I die cut that diagonal background from a bunch of different colors of cardstock? Well, we still have those to use, and I'm going to use 2 of them on this card, layering them up. Okay, so I have the 2 purple ones, a light purple and a darker purple, and watch, I'm going to flip one of them over and then glue the other one on top of it, and I get this kind of plaid looking background. It's like a lattice look, very easy to do. Oftentimes, this is a fun technique that you can do with a background die. Many background dies have symmetrical patterns or whatever. If you flip one of the die cuts over and glue the other one on top, you can get a cool new look. So I'm going to glue the first one down onto a piece of white cardstock that's the perfect size. And then I'll glue the other one on top, making sure I get that lattice pattern. And I do have my other colorful diagonal background pieces that I die cut that I can use to make additional cards. And I'll do the same design. Okay, now that we have this background, I wanted to fill this in with lots of flowers. And it was going to take some time to do all those, so I decided to take one large flower bouquet image and do 2 of them. So this is the Pinkfresh Studio Layered Bouquet stamp set. I've been wanting to use this. There's some beautiful examples out there, and it's very easy to layer. What I did is I die cut a bunch of them from white cardstock. I have the negative space in my MISTI stamping tool. I popped one of the die cuts in and I'll stamp on it. Then I'll remove the die cut and put another one in and stamp on it. And I'll do that to all of my die cuts so I can easily make a bunch at one time and I don't have to die cut afterwards. I actually find it easier to do all of the die cutting before the stamping when I'm mass producing. Okay, now I'm doing the leaves here in a soft green. It was a little too light for what I was going for, so I went ahead and double stamped it. And then we can go ahead with the next layer. So this is the next layer of the flower. I'm doing a slightly darker purple color. And I stamped that and I realized it didn't really match the cardstock that I have. So I wanted to add some blue to it, so it was more of an indigo color. So I have Slumber color here, and I'm using an inking tool just to apply a little bit of it to the stamp. Then I will stamp that, and it puts a little bit of blue towards the base of those images. You could put as much as you want. You can control it by using an inking tool to apply the ink to the stamp. And you can see how it just adds a little blue to it. I then went in and stamped the stem. Again, I needed a little bit darker, so I went ahead and stamped it again. And there we have our image. And off screen, I was stamping additional ones all along the way. Now I wanted this guy to stand up with dimension against our busy background. So I have 2 additional die cuts over there. Those were actually mess ups of mine. They don't look like mess ups, but I promise they were in real life. And instead of throwing them away, I'm gluing them behind my nice one, and it'll give dimension on my card. So I never let those mess ups go to waste. You can use scrap cardstock for this too, but by layering them up, stacking up these die cuts, you get dimension that will really make a big difference on the final card. Okay, so I also have a sentiment for this. I use the Pinkfresh Studio Do All Things with Love die that you see up there on the top left. And you can see on the top right what it normally looks like. Well, I decided just to use the words with love to get a new sentiment out of this. So I die cut with love 3 times from white cardstock and once from purple glitter cardstock, and then glued that onto the shadow. I then cut the words with and love apart because I wasn't really sure how I was going to go about designing the card. Okay, remember earlier how I created those scallop window frames and I said I'd show you how I did it? Here I'm going to do it again. I have that background die. I'm die cutting it from white cardstock. I only need one of the frames. Then I have a circle die that's bigger than it that I'm going to place around it and run through my die cut machine. So now I have this little scallop circle frame. I'm gluing it onto a solid circle, and I thought that would be a nice backdrop for the sentiment. Notice I created 2 of those flower bouquets that I showed you earlier. So I have 2 that have that stacked dimension behind them, and I glued them to come out from the center of the card. So I've got that scallop circle in the background, our 2 bouquets coming out from that, and then the with love on top. I also added a few purple gemstones. And then all of that is on a note card that's a little bit smaller than 4 inches by 9 inches. And you can see the white envelope back there. It's a letter size envelope. I actually had some nice ones left over in my stash, but you could definitely use a business envelope for these. I will link to a few options below that you can check out. So I hope those 3 cards that I've done so far show how you can take a background die and use all the different parts and pieces from a few die cuts to create a lot of cards with different looks. Remember, I still have a lot of pieces left over to make additional cards. Okay, my last 2 cards feature using border dies along with some scraps to create colorful backgrounds. I get asked a lot about ideas for using border dies, and I think this is one of the best things you can do with them. Now I'm going to be using that same Slimline size, the large narrow card. So I have a bunch of colored cardstock here. Again, these are 4 1/4 by 8.5 inches long. They are just leftovers that I have from when I cut a piece of cardstock in half to make a note card. But dig through your scraps, find what you have. You really can use just about anything, even pattern paper for this. Now the dies that I'm using today are new border dies from Pinkfresh Studio. These are slim Lacy edger dies. They have another edger die set that's great too, but I wanted these fancy ones. And these are long, so they work for the Slimline card, the narrow long cards. But you could use the regular border dies that you may have, which you'll see with my second example. So I have these pieces of cardstock. I'm going to tape one border die up against one edge and the other border die up against the other edge so that I can save some time by cutting the two border pieces at once. One of the borders will go on this card and one of the borders will go on my next card. Now remember, these are about 9 inches long, so they fit nicely on a cutting plate. But again, I want to make sure I get a nice cut. So I'm going to first go through making sure that the first half of the die gets cut. So you can see that that second half is hanging off, or the second part of it is hanging off. That's okay. Now I'm going to shift it over, push it to the left, and run it back through. So that time I can be sure the end on the right is cutting. So it just doing that extra pass, I think, gives really good results. Okay, so now I can remove the border dies, and there we have two fancy borders cut from the edge of the scrap. So we still have that whole center area that we can cut more border dies from, or do any other kind of scrap technique that we want. By the way, I've done a lot of scrap videos in the past, and I will link to a playlist up here for you to check out because I think it's so rewarding to use up all those little pieces on a card. Now these are bigger pieces, but you could definitely use smaller pieces for it. Okay, after I die cut a bunch of those borders, let's start with the first card. I have this little border here. I love the detail of it. I'm putting liquid adhesive very quickly on the back of it. I just kind of run it along it. And then I'm going to glue it along the edge of that pink that we have left over. This will back it so that it has solid pink behind it. You could definitely leave it as is, where the white will show through the holes, but I kind of like this pink on pink look. It looks like lace up close. So I'll do that for each of the different colors. Okay, next I have a piece of white cardstock here that I'm going to cover with double-sided adhesive. This piece is cut to 3 1/4 by 8 1/4, which is a nice size to fit on the Slimline card design and dies that Pinkfresh Studio has to offer. But you could use any size that you want here. So I put it down onto my double-sided tape, and then I can trim the extra away. And I'll trim this thin strip off, and I'll save that too by wrapping it around that roll of double-sided tape. So you can keep all the little pieces if you'd like. I then press it down with a bone folder, and then I'll remove the release paper so that all the adhesive is exposed. Now I put the release paper back down so I had a place to touch it as I'm assembling it. It's just helpful and it'll move easily. So I started with the pink border and I put it right up against the top edge. I'll then come in with the red border, and notice I'm overlapping them, so it actually gives it dimension. So it's kind of got it tucked behind, the pink is kind of tucked behind the red now. And I'll do that with each color that I add. Notice how I can move that release paper over each time so I have somewhere to grab onto, because that tape is super strong if you put your hand into it. Okay, so I went ahead and covered that entire piece with different color strips. Then I can flip it over and trim off the excess. I had a little white little edge hanging off there, and instead of coming in and adding another border, I just trimmed that off too. And there you can see the detail of that background. I really like how it looks kind of like it's pleats of lace. I don't know. It's just fun and a great way to use your border dies creatively. Now I wanted to add a sentiment to this and keep it pretty clean. So I decided to use letter die cuts because I could make whatever sentiment I want. And I decided to do Kind Friend. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Kelly Alpha Lower dies. There's a upper die set too. Really like the style of these a lot. So I die cut 3 of each letter and I'm gluing them on top of each other so they have some dimension. This card is going to a friend who's a nurse, and I really appreciate the kindness that she has during this difficult time, and I felt she could use a little encouragement. I also stamped a little sentiment, and instead of putting foam tape on the back of it, I like to put extra cardstock on the back. I just feel like it holds up nicer. So I am gluing it onto a scrap of white cardstock here, and then I trim off the excess. Then I'll put glue on the back of that, and put it back onto that extra white cardstock and trim it again. And I'll do this a couple times, and I can save this leftover piece for another sentiment strip later on. And this just really gives nice, secure, strong, stable dimension that this will add to the card. So I put adhesive on that, and I'm glued it to my card where I want it to be, and now I will assemble the letters around it. I usually like to start at the front and the end of my words and then fill in from there so that you end up completing your sentiment with the space between the words. That way you don't run out of room and not have a space between your two words. So I glued down the letters kind friends, and I like to put my phone on it while it dries to make sure that it lays flat. Okay, after I finish that background, I have the Pinkfresh Slimline stitched rectangle die from the set I showed you at the beginning of the video, and it's perfect to go around that piece that we created. Now here's how I create note cards for this. This is a full piece of cardstock, 8.5 by 11. I score it right down the middle at 4 1/4. That's right down the middle. I then use my bone folder to reinforce that fold line. And then I glue my background onto it. That way I can make sure that my note card's the right size and I don't have to measure or do anything else. This is the easiest way to do it. So I glue it kind of towards the top left corner. Then anything I need to trim off, I can trim off. Now my card size ends up being, for all of these, 8 7/8 by 3 7/8, which, easier to say, a little bit smaller than 4 inches by 9 inches. So there you can see the completed card, the dimension we have behind our letters, and the detail we have using that border die. It's really a fun way to use pretty much any border die you may have. And I'll be honest, I'm picky when it comes to border dies. Like, I like a certain kind of look, something that isn't too detailed or whatever. This one is perfect, as is the next one, and that's why I decided to use them. And they're long, so I could use them on a regular note card size at a diagonal too. By the way, that sentiment is from the Pinkfresh Studio Leafy Decor stamp set, which I've used before in videos too. Okay, my last card shows how to use the other border die pieces that I created, this time at an angle, and this one's kind of fun because it all comes together really easily. So I have the border die cuts, and again, I'm going to glue a solid strip behind that so that no color peeks through except the color that we glue there. I just like this layered look, but you could leave it open if you prefer. And I'll do that with all of the colors of cardstock borders that we created. I then have a white background, and instead of trying to line them up, I decided to do it at an angle. So again, this is the same size as before. I think it's 3 1/4 by 7 1/4, but you could do whatever size you want. I cover it with adhesive. I find this is the easiest way to do it. You could use double-sided tape, glue stick, whatever you've got. And then I just start. I kind of put it down wherever I want, making sure that I conserve the leftover hanging off. See how I put it right up against the edge on the left, and all the leftovers hanging out on the right or at the top there. Once again, I'm overlapping these so they have that kind of tucked in look that I think really adds to the dimension of it. So I'll continue to do this. Again, you want to try to conserve all of it to the right or towards the top. Okay, so now I can flip this over and cut off all the excess. Now notice we need some more strips to fill up the background. No need to cut anymore. All these leftover pieces that we just cut off will fit perfectly to fill in that leftover space. Okay, so now I'm going to take the purple piece here. I got to lift up that pink one to tuck it under. I probably should have started in the corner, but you know, this seemed to work out in the end. And then on the other side, I have those longer pink, red, orange, yellow, so on pieces that will glue in the other corner. So it all magically works. I just needed one border strip of each color to fill in that entire background. This would be fun also if you put a different color behind each of the border strips so you can allow a little different color to pop through. Sky's the limit. Okay, for the sentiment on this one, I decided to use the Pinkfresh Studio Adore Alpha dies. I've used these before also. I just like the nice block look of it. What I have here is a piece of purple tape that's facing up towards the camera, so this sticky is facing up. Sorry my head keeps getting in the way, but I'm arranging the letters for Amazing that I die cut, and those are again stacked 3 tall. Once I have them arranged there on the tape, I can take another piece of tape, lay it across the top. I want these all to stay together. Then I can lift up my tape, flip it over, pull away the tape that was on the back. So see how I pull that away? Now all my letters are connected and ready to add to our card. And this purple tape can be reused on other projects so it doesn't go to waste. I put adhesive on the back of each of my letters. Now I can pick up that tape as one piece and lay it on our card, and I can make sure I get it centered and straight and the perfect spacing. I decided to put it towards the bottom of the panel. I just leave it there with the tape on for a few minutes while it dries. Once it's dry, I can go ahead and pull off the tape. When I pull off the tape, I like to do it like I'm pulling it back right against itself instead of pulling it up directly up. See how I'm pulling it down against itself? And that will prevent any tearing. So I finished this card off just like the last one. I glued it onto a white die cut and then onto a white note card that I created that's a little bit smaller than 4x9. I also stamped "You Are So" on a piece of white cardstock and added that on top of the letters. So you can see that layered background that we created with scraps using a border die. And that because I kind of tucked each border behind the other, you get added dimension to it. And by the way, the "You Are So" is from this "You Are So Wonderful" from the Layered Bouquet stamp set that I used on one of my cards earlier in this video. I like to look around in my stamp sets to find sentiments that I can cut up and use in new ways. Okay, so there are some card examples for you. The long and narrow card design that really is fun and refreshing. I encourage you to try them out. And also some ideas for using all the bits and pieces of your background dies and border dies. If you are interested in the different supplies that I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. In the middle, I have a couple other videos for you. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you'll join me in making cards to send out to people. Right now, I think we can use them more than ever. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.